Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, I come to the floor today to discuss the stagnant Obama economy and how Obamacare is making things worse. This Monday marks the 5th anniversary of the day the President signed his trillion-dollar stimulus bill into law. In remarks he gave in Denver that very day he signed the bill, the President stated that the legislation marked the beginning of the end of the nation's economic troubles. 5 years later, however, the end of the nation's economic troubles is nowhere in sight. The headlines of the jobs report released Friday say it all. The headline from the Associated Press said, U.S. economy may be stuck in slow lane for long run. New York Times headline, weakness continues as 113,000 jobs are added in January. From CBS News, another month of weak job growth raises slowdown fears. From the Wall Street Journal, U.S. adds 113,000 jobs in latest worrying sign on growth. From Reuters, U.S. employment fails to rebound strongly from winter chill. Well, Madam President, before passage of the stimulus, presidential advisor Christina Romer predicted that the stimulus bill would reduce the unemployment rate to 5% by the year 2014. In fact, over the past 5 years, the unemployment rate has never come close to falling that low. Last month's unemployment rate was 6.6%, and if so many people hadn't dropped out of the labor force over the past several years, that number would be even higher. If the labor force participation rate were the same as it was when President Obama took office, our current unemployment rate would be a staggering 10.5%. Despite the fact that the recession technically ended 55 months ago, we're still nowhere near where we need to be in terms of economic recovery. CBS News reported on Friday that the economy would have to gain an average of 285,000 jobs per month for the next 3 years just to get us back to where we were before the recession. Yet job creation for the past year hasn't even come close to that. In fact, our economy has averaged just 180,000 new jobs per month approximately over the past year. If we continue at that same rate, it will take us over 5 years to return to where we were before the recession. Madam President, President Obama's economic policies have left our economy mired in stagnation, and his health care law is making things even worse. Last week, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office released a new report on Obamacare. It found that Obamacare will result in the equivalent of 2.5 million fewer full-time jobs over the next 10 years. 2.5 million fewer jobs. Our economy is millions of jobs away from where it needs to be. Our labor force participation rate is near a 35-year low. And the President's health care law is going to result in 2.5 million fewer full-time jobs. Madam President, how will that work? Well, the CBO report made clear that Obamacare provides disincentives to work, particularly for those at the low-income end of the spectrum. An individual receiving Obamacare subsidies to pay for his or her health insurance may decide not to accept more hours or a higher-paying job so that he or she doesn't exceed the income cap for receiving subsidies. At the higher end of the wage spectrum, workers may decide not to rise too far up the ladder so that their income doesn't reach the point at which it would be subject to Obamacare taxes. Thus, Obamacare essentially traps workers in lower-paying jobs, putting a de facto limit on the prosperity of literally millions of Americans. Madam President, the CBO reinforces that notion not just by projecting that 2.5 million people will drop out of the workforce, but also by projecting that those who stay in the workforce will earn less. According to one analysis of the CBO report, Obamacare will reduce total wages by an estimated $70 billion per year. Without question, most of this burden will be placed on lower and middle-income families who are already struggling to make ends meet. Furthermore, by providing Americans with disincentives to work, Obamacare will limit our economic growth. As the editors of the National Review put it, and I quote, "The depth of the Obamacare crater in the labor force isn't some abstract unemployment rate, but the lost value of the work those Americans would have done, end quote. Americans working creates economic growth. It's as simple as that. Encouraging Americans to work less or quit work altogether will undermine American prosperity and American values, American families, I should say, security. And those who find work and are willing and able to fulfill their jobs deserve wages that are unhindered by a government takeover of health care. Combine the CBO report with our experience of Obamacare so far, and the future does not look promising. Lower-income Americans living off meager salaries and government health care subsidies just to get by. Middle-income Americans struggling to pay higher health insurance premiums and deductibles. Upper-income Americans and small business owners too reluctant to create jobs and wealth for fear that they'll be subjected to Obamacare's burdensome taxes and regulations. That's not the kind of future any American desires, but that's exactly the future Obamacare is bringing us. In fact, for too many Americans, that future is already here. With Obamacare's full implementation this year, Americans are facing huge premium increases and steep hikes in their out-of-pocket costs. They're losing access to their doctors and hospitals, and all too often, they're facing fewer hours or fewer benefits at their jobs as their employers struggle to comply with Obamacare's taxes and mandates. Even the President has tacitly acknowledged the burdens his health care law places on employers by once again delaying one of the law's job-destroying mandates. While I'm glad some businesses will get relief until 2016, Congress should go further, much further, and ensure that every single American is protected from this disastrous law. Madam President, we can do better than Obamacare and the President's economic policies. The President has called for 2014 to be a year of action, and Republicans couldn't agree more. It's past time to take action to start reversing Obamacare's damage and finally get our economic recovery off the ground. Almost 2 weeks ago, the Obama State Department released its 5th environmental review showing that the Keystone XL pipeline would have no significant impact on global carbon emissions. There is strong bipartisan support in both houses of Congress for approving that pipeline and the 42,000 jobs it will support. The President needs to stop pandering, Madam President, to far-left environmentalists and immediately approve the pipeline and the good-paying jobs it will open for Americans. Next, the President should pick up that phone he keeps talking about to call the Senate Majority Leader and tell him to bring the Bipartisan Trade Promotion Authority legislation to the floor. Passing Trade Promotion Authority would help U.S. farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, and job creators gain access to 1 billion consumers around the globe. The Majority Leader needs to stop obstructing the jobs this bill would create and join members of both parties to pass this important legislation. Finally, the President should throw his support behind a repeal of the medical device tax in his health care law. This tax on life-saving medical technologies like pacemakers and insulin pumps is forcing medical device companies to send American jobs overseas. There is strong bipartisan support for repealing the tax, and the President should add his. Madam President, far too many Americans have spent the past 5.5 years of the Obama presidency struggling to get by. Household income has fallen. Health care costs have risen. Jobs and opportunity have been few and far between. For many Americans, the possibility of a secure economic future seems further and further out of reach. Madam President, it doesn't have to be this way. We can turn our economy around by abandoning the President's failed economic proposals and embracing the kind of legislation that will open up new jobs and opportunities for the American people. The 3 proposals I've outlined above are a good place to start. I hope the President will join Republicans and Democrats to get these priorities done. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
ask unanimous consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection, we terminate. The chair lays before the Senate a certificate of appointment to fill the vacancy created by the resignation of Senator Max Baucus of Montana. The certificate, the chair is advised, is in the form suggested by the Senate. If there is no objection, the reading of the certificate will be waived and will be printed in full in the record. If the Senator-Designate would now present himself to the desk, the chair will administer the oath of office. True. Okay. And if you will just repeat it, I'm going to ask you, please raise your right hand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you're about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Congratulations.
Vice President. Thank you so much.
All right, we got to make this.
Mr. Alexander. Senate will come to order. The senator
Madam President,
from Hawaii.
are we in a quorum call?
We are,
I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
without objection.
Madam President, there is overwhelming bipartisan support to repeal the COLA reduction for military retirees that was enacted last December in the budget bill. The debate now is whether and how to pay for the cost of this repeal. I agree with my friend, Senator Mark Begich of Alaska, that our veterans have already paid for this repeal with their service to our country. However, there are some senators who take a different view and have offered what we refer to as pay-for amendments. Today, I rise in strong opposition to the AYOT pay-for amendment. The bill before us, S-1963, the Military Retirement Pay Restoration Act, would repeal the COLA reduction for military retirees. This bill is sponsored by Senators Pryor, Hagan, and Begich, and I applaud their leadership on this issue. Cutting military pensions was a bad idea. An even worse idea is to set up a contest between providing pensions to veterans and providing anti-poverty assistance to children. That is the choice Republicans want us to make. I wish I could honestly say this so-called choice is hard to believe, but I can't. It is like choosing between cutting off an arm or a leg from the body politic. Vets or poor children, aren't they both in need of fair treatment? Again, there is bipartisan support to restore the COLA cuts for veterans. But I'm told that my Republican colleagues won't allow us to have an up or down vote on the Military Retirement Pay Restoration Act unless we also vote on the AYOT Amendment number 2732. What does this amendment do? The AYOT amendment would deny anti-poverty assistance to the children of undocumented immigrants who are working and paying billions of dollars in taxes. It would cut this child poverty program by more than $18 billion over 10 years to pay for the restoration of COLAs for military retirees, which would cost about $6 billion over 10 years. In other words, the AYOT amendment would deny $3 of anti-poverty assistance to children in order to restore $1 of retirement pay to our veterans. That is unconscionable. We should not taint the benefits we provide to veterans by hurting children in the process. Hurting children does no honor to our veterans' service. The children targeted by the AYOT amendment did not decide on their own to come to this country illegally. They were brought here by their parents. These children are dreamers, our dreamers. We should not punish them for their parents' decisions. We should help these children to succeed so they can contribute to this great country. Their parents are doing their part by working and paying more than $16 billion in taxes each year, more than $160 billion over 10 years. We should not deny them this small measure of help. Let me acknowledge that it is politically difficult to vote against the offset in the AYOT amendment. Why? Because the amendment targets people who have no political power. These are children of parents who cannot vote. These are children of parents who are very poor, who themselves live on the edge of poverty or far into the depths of it. Their parents work 1, 2, or even 3 jobs and pay the taxes they owe, but they are barely making ends meet. They are far removed from the level of wealth that too often today translates into political power. These are children or parents who came to this country the same way many of our ancestors came to this country 100 or 200 years ago, and for the same reasons, to escape poverty, to seek opportunity, and to give their children a better life than they had. Their parents are working and paying billions of dollars in taxes each year, which is extending the lives of the Social Security and Medicare trust funds as examples. Their parents are working and paying taxes, but they came here illegally, and therefore they must live in the shadows and live in fear. Put simply, these are children of families who have no political power, none. They are the easiest to go after, and that's what this Ayotte Amendment does. But we should help these families. We should help these dreamers. It is an ancient and universal principle that we should help the least among us. To paraphrase the book of Matthew, we should treat the least among us as we would treat the mightiest among us. That is why the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops opposes the Ayotte Amendment. We should not hurt the least among us in order to help our veterans. How much money would the Ayotte Amendment deny to these children? The maximum child tax credit is $1,000 per child, which is about $2.74 per day per child. To many of us, $2.74 per day seems like a small amount. But to a child in poverty, it is literally the difference between eating and not eating. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2011, the average cost of one meal for one person was $2.67. That was the average cost, which means a lot of people spent less than $2.67 on each meal. By way of comparison, SNAP benefits average about $4 per person per day, $4 for 3 meals, not just one. So our own food program is less than what our own Bureau of Labor Statistics say is the average cost of a meal. So for a low-income child, the $2.74 per day she gets from the child tax credit is equivalent to about 1 meal. If the child is very poor, it probably means 2 meals. Put simply, if she gets the child tax credit, she eats. If she doesn't, she doesn't. Of course, not every child receives the maximum refundable credit. The amount of the refund is determined in part on the family's income, so poor families receive even less. The average income for the families who would be affected by the Ayotte Amendment is about $21,000 per year. They have to be working and paying taxes to get even 1 dime from the child tax credit program. Their average child tax credit refund is about $1,800, which is about $5 a day. That may not be much money to the senators in this body, but that $5 pays for a meal for the whole family. It is about 8% of their income. We should not be denying this basic level of assistance to any child in this country, no matter who their parents are or how they came here. We should not deny children this assistance when their parents, and I'm going to repeat it again, will pay over $160 billion in taxes in 10 years, during which this provision is cutting $18 billion. The way the child tax credit is structured, only working families who are paying these kinds of taxes can claim the refundable portion. It is not fair that families work and pay taxes but are then denied help, $2.74 per day for a child. We should not deny children this assistance under the guise of combating fraud. Imposing a Social Security number requirement on qualifying children will not end the fraud that the proponents of this amendment have cited. We should go after the fraud, but it should be obvious that any criminal willing to commit the fraud described by the proponents will not be deterred by having to fill in a 9-digit Social Security number. This does not solve the fraud problem. The fraud we have heard about involves undocumented immigrants who are falsifying where they live and where their children live in order to claim their tax credit. We are told about 4 immigrants using a single address, yet we hear nothing about the 18,000 corporations that use one address in the Cayman Islands to avoid paying their fair share of corporate taxes. Instead of going after working families who are paying taxes, we should close the loophole that allows these corporations to evade their taxes. How many groups in this country is Congress going to hurt? We hurt women when we don't raise the minimum wage. We hurt people who are out of work through no fault of their own when we don't extend unemployment benefits. Now we're hurting dreamers. We should not do this. I urge my colleagues to oppose the Ayotte amendment. I yield back. And I note the absence of a quorum.
Will the senator withhold her suggestion?
Yes, I will.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m. The Senate